now that we finished wrapping up 2022, it's time for us to set up for 2023. And the first step in doing that is going through my anticipated releases for the year. Now, there is a disclaimer that comes with this every single year, because as thorough as I try to be, I am sure that there are things that you guys know that I'm excited for that I've forgotten to put in this list. I'm not a person that anticipates things, and I think that is because I'm terrified of disappointment. So if I don't get excited for something, then it can't disappoint me. So I also get asked every year how I find out what my anticipated releases are, like how I find out what's coming out. If you go to the browse section on Goodreads, there's a section for upcoming releases where it shows you a bunch of stuff that's coming out every month based on things that are already shelved on your Goodreads. So that is my first port of call, and then I look through the series section of my spreadsheet and see what books are going to have sequels coming out in the following year. Now, there are going to be a bunch of books that haven't been announced yet, especially things that are released towards the end of the year, but for now I have a list of 19 books that have a release date for 2023. Depending on where I've got these from, it could be that this is the US release date, not the UK release date. It could be that things get rearranged, but these are just the dates that I found, and I do normally go off Goodreads for the release dates. So this is going to be in chronological order, and we are going to be kicking off with a book that is released today, the day that I'm filming this, but way before you guys are going to see it. And I think it actually arrived this morning. I just haven't opened it yet, but that is Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. In terms of this being anticipated, it's not super high on my list because I actually have not read Ninth House yet, but I do own all of Leigh Bardugo's books in hardback. So when I was pre-ordering stuff towards the end of last year, I think it was actually last June, I pre-ordered this. I definitely wanted to make sure that I got a hardcover copy of Hellbent in there. So this is the sequel to Leigh Bardugo's first adult series, which is an urban / paranormal fantasy that follows a girl called Alex Stern, who is, she attends, I can't remember if it's Harvard or Yale, but she's part of like the Ninth Secret Society, and the job of that secret society is to police the rest of them. I think one of her friends goes missing and everybody's obsessed with him. Is it Darlington? And I think that the plot is that she's trying to figure out what happened to him, but I have given many Leigh Bardugo books 5 stars. Even though I'm not a super big fan of YA anymore, I still really like Leigh Bardugo's YA, so I am expecting good things from the Alex Stern series. The next one is released on the 28th of February, and it is another one that I'm not especially excited for, but I do have it pre-ordered, and that is A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. I actually didn't look at the synopsis of this. It's a prequel to Priory of the Orange Tree. So I think Samantha Shannon's plan for that series is to just release like a series of standalones, like fantasy standalones, all set within the same world. And I think that this one is set before Priory of the Orange Tree. Now, I did read Priory of the Orange Tree the year that it was released, which I think was 2018, and I gave it 4 stars at the time. But thinking like in hindsight, that is a book that I really don't like. It had a lot of promising elements. I just think that that book is the perfect example of why epic fantasy shouldn't be a standalone, because it just doesn't work. So while I love the characters, the writing was great. I like Samantha Shannon's writing. The Bone Season series is one of my favorite series of all time. Priory of the Orange Tree didn't do it for me, but because I love Samantha Shannon so much within the Bone Season, I decided that I would pick this one up, and if I don't like this one, then I just won't read. I will pretty much only read the Bone Season series, although she does have, I think, some sort of Greek retelling coming out at some point, which sounds really interesting to me. For the 7th of March, we have 100% one of my most anticipated releases of the year, which is Endless Terrors by KJ Sutton. This one is the 5th book in the Fortuna Swan series, which is my favorite indie fantasy romance series of all time. It is a fairy romance story that is following a woman called Fortuna, who is a nightmare, and she is now the last of her kind because her brother went missing 2 years ago and she just cannot find a trace of him. So she is about to give up hope when a very powerful fairy male approaches her and says that he actually knows where her brother is and he will take her directly to him, providing that she marries him. So the plot has thickened exponentially between books 1 and 4, and I'm really excited for book 5 because we have the introduction of something a little bit new at the end of book 4, and I'm really excited to see how that plays out, especially because I am friends with the author. I'm really good friends with Kelsey. She has given me some hints about where the direction of this is going, and I'm very excited to see that play out, but also incredibly nervous because we didn't have a gut-wrenching end to book 4, so I feel like we're gonna have a gut-wrenching end to book 5 before we hopefully, fingers crossed, have a happy ending at the end of book 6. For the 30th of March, we have the Valkyrie by Kate Hartfield, which I'm I'm pretty sure is going to be coming in a brand new subscription box that I have ordered to review for you guys. The first month is going to be February, but I don't know too much about this one specifically, but it is on here because it sealed the deal for me actually trying out this subscription box, because I read the embroidered book by Kate Hartfield last year and really enjoyed it. It's one of my honorable mentions, or like almost best of the year, and this one is a Norse mythology retelling. I'm not a historical girly normally, although mythology is a little bit different. I do prefer like mythology to like straight up historical, but because I loved the embroidered book so much, I've decided that this is definitely one that I'm going to be giving a try. So this is where we find out that maybe instead of doing an anticipated 2023 releases video, I should have just done an anticipated April releases video, because the next 8 books that I'm going to be talking about are released in April. So 8 of the 19 books in this video are all April releases, and the first one is actually a stand-in for 4 books, because I think the first of Brandon Sanderson's secret projects, which is Tress of the Emerald Sea, is going to be released in the physical edition in the UK on the 4th of April. I don't know much about this. I know that Tress of the Emerald Sea is a Cosmere novel, and I only wanted to mention this one because the people who backed the Kickstarter didn't know anything about these going into them, and that was kind of like part of the appeal of the Kickstarter. So I don't want to come along and give you guys all of the titles, which in the UK we know because they've just released them on the Waterstones website, and I haven't actually looked into the synopsis. But Brandon Sanderson over the pandemic wrote like 4 full-length novels, and he did like a Kickstarter project to release them throughout 2023. I am going to read these. I am going to buy them and read them at some point, but I don't think I want the hardbacks, because with the exception of Rhythm of War and the Skyward series, all of my Sanderson books are paperback, and because I still have to read Second Year and Mistborn, because I want to reread the Stormlight Archive and read Rhythm of War, I don't think that these are going to be a massive priority for me until 2024 when they're released in paperback, but I am anticipating them. I am going to be reading them at some point, just maybe not this year. For the 6th of April, we have the first of Olivia Blake's 2023 releases, which I do have all of them pre-ordered because the Waterstones editions are really nice. But the first one is One for My Enemy, and this one sounds to me a lot like a cross between the Greenbaum Saga by Fonda Lee and An Unkindness of Magicians by Kat Howard, because this is an urban fantasy following 2 rival witch families, and on one side we have 2 sisters, and the head of their family is called Baba Yaga and is a supplier of intoxicants, and then there is an event which isn't disclosed in the synopsis that causes the break of the stalemate between these 2 families. So I'm assuming we go into a little bit of a war between them. I really love the Atlas 6, and I haven't read Alone with You in the Ether yet, but the synopses of Olivia Blake's upcoming releases paired with what I know about her writing style is really interesting to me, so I'm definitely highly anticipating this one. For the 11th of April, we have Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee, which I am interested in because Fonda Lee, but I'm a little bit dubious because it is a Tor novella. No shade on Tor, it's the novella part that I have a problem with. Typically don't love short fantasy stories, but this is an epic fantasy about a girl whose parents were killed by manticores, and so she devotes her life to killing the creatures that killed her family, and she joins a group of rock riders, I think, and becomes one herself to kill manticores. It's listed as like a fantasy fable. I do like short fairy tale-esque kind of stories, so I might like it in that regard, but I am just like a little bit nervous because I'm not a novella girly. We have 3 for the 18th of April, so RIP my wallet. The first one is The Blood Gift by N.E. Davenport. This one is a duology, so it will close out the series, and The Blood Trials is actually another book that was on my honorable mentions or almost best of 2022. It is very reminiscent of Red Rising, and it was recommended to me many times because of its similarities to Red Rising, which prepare yourself for, you already know what my most anticipated, like my actual most anticipated release of 2023 is going to be. But The Blood Trials is about a girl called Ikenna who was supposed to follow in her grandfather's footsteps and become like one of these prestigious military personnel, but her grandfather died and she planned to take a year out to deal with the grief. However, her grandfather's friend and advisor approaches her and says that he thinks that he's found evidence that her grandfather was actually murdered. So then she does decide to join this series of trials to become this military warrior so that she can get close to and kill the people who killed her grandfather. Really loved it. It has a bit too much plot for the length of the book. I would have preferred if this was a trilogy, I think. But I loved the angst in here and also the impulsivity of the main character because it made for a lot of dramatic situations. So I am really excited for The Blood Gift. I will definitely read more from N.E. Davenport output in the future as well. I'm just hoping that in the future they choose to slow down the pace a little bit, because that would have made probably the Blood Trials a 5-star read for me. Also for the 18th, we have Bewitched by Laurie Thalassa, who is one of my favorite fantasy romance authors. This one is actually set in the world of The Bargainer, which is one of my favorite fantasy romance series. So The Bargainer is about the Fae, and Bewitched, I think, is about the witches of the world, which we have a brief introduction to some of the witches in the Bargainer series. But this is about a woman who is trying to perform a quest that she thinks is pretty simple so that she can gain entry into a coven. However, due to some sort of unforeseen circumstances, she ends up encountering an ancient tomb and waking the sleeping man inside of it, who is actually this big evil supernatural creature called Memnon the Cursed. I'm really excited for this one. The last book for the 18th is actually, it's a special edition of a book that I read years ago, but I thought I would put it in here because Waterstones are, I don't know if it's just Waterstones, but there is going to be like a collector's edition of It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover published, and it's one of my favorite books of all time, so I would like a hardback copy. But this one is a contemporary standalone. She just released a sequel that nobody asked for. It's completely unnecessary. I enjoyed it, but it's completely unnecessary. But It Ends With Us is a contemporary standalone about a girl whose father dies, and she has very complex feelings about him because she loves him as he's her father, but he abused her mother like for her entire life, and she had to witness that growing up. So she goes up to a rooftop of an apartment building to contemplate everything that like his death means and like resolve some complex emotions, when she meets a neurosurgeon up there who is blowing off steam after his shift, and they decide to have a one-night stand, but he gets called away to perform emergency surgery. So she just writes it off as like a missed opportunity until she meets him again 6 months later. And then during this time, as she's like moving on with her life, she is also going through a box of diaries that she wrote when she was a teenager, heavily featuring a young homeless boy called Atlas that she was close to in her teenage years. Like I said, already read this one, already loved it, 5-star read, and I just want the collector's edition. We then have two for the 25th, and one is A Sleight of Shadows by Kat Howard, which, am I anticipating this at this point? I have absolutely no idea, but I read An Unkindness of Magicians in like 2018 and gave it 5 stars, really loved it. At the time, it was a standalone set in New York City about a tournament that's held every 20 years? It's been a while, but all of the important magician families come together every 20 years and they have a tournament to see who's going to be the one that like rules them for the next 20 years. And this girl, I think she's called Sydney, appears from nowhere and participates in these trials as like not a member of one of the important families. So it is a standalone, it wraps up, and considering it was a standalone and not very long, I was very impressed because I typically don't like that kind of thing. I like books to be really long and like full of detail. So I was really anticipating the second book, which is A Sleight of Shadows, but it was supposed to be released in like 2019 and it's finally being released in 2023. The other one for the 25th is In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune, which is his latest standalone that's in the same kind of vein as House in the Cerulean Sea. This one is actually, I feel, more of a sci-fi than a fantasy because it follows a family of robots that live with a human, kind of like safe and hidden. And one day one of them scavenges an android that reveals a dark past where robots used to hunt humans. And the android that they scavenge actually alerts authorities to the location of the family. And one of them is taken away. So the rest of them are trying to find the one that's been taken before they are like recommissioned or reprogrammed. I really, really liked House in the Cerulean Sea. I'm also hoping to read Under the Whispering Door in 2023, and Waterstones are doing absolutely gorgeous editions of TJ Klune's books, which is why I 100% have this one on pre-order. Moving on to May, I just have two for the 23rd. The first one is The Battle Drum by Sarah El Arifi, which is the second book in the Ending Fire trilogy, the first book being The Final Strife. The Final Strife is once again a book that was on my honorable mentions / almost best of 2022, and it is an adult fantasy series that is set in a world that is separated, like people are separated by blood. You have your lowest class, which are people with translucent blood, and they have been mutilated for generations because of a failed rebellion hundreds of years ago. In the middle, you have the blue bloods that are like your peasant class, and then everybody else are red bloods, like the nobility and the regular citizens. So about 20 years before the start of this story, 12 blue-blooded and red-blooded babies were swapped by blue-blooded rebels so that the red-blooded children could be raised knowing the oppression that is faced by the lower classes. And they did did this with the intention of submitting all of these children into a series of trials that selects the leaders of this world. So you're following like one person from each class, including a red-blooded child that was raised by blue bloods and one of the blue-blooded children that was swapped and has been raised in a position of privilege. I really, really loved the first book, and I love the plot threads that it left hanging to go into book 2. I gave book 1 4 stars, but I see strong potential with the next book in this series for it to be 5 stars, so I'm really excited to find out if that's the case. The other one for the 23rd of May I do feel is subject to change for some reason, but that is Lore Olympus Volume 4 by Rachel Smith, which is the 4th installment of the bind up of the Lore Olympus webcomic, which is a retelling of Greek mythology that has a particular focus on Hades and Persephone. So it is like a romantic leaning retelling, but all of the Greek gods and goddesses are present, but modernized, made more relatable, while still not necessarily shying away from some of the darker topics found in Greek myth, like sexual assault and domestic abuse. It's one of my favorite comic series ever, and I like every time I read a volume, it takes everything in my power to not binge all of the ones that are available, because it is like a free to read webcomic. So yeah, I'm very excited for volume 4 of that. We also have 2 for the 8th of June. The first one is The Shadow Cabinet by Juno Dawson, which is the sequel to Her Majesty's Royal Coven. Once again, a book that was on my almost best of 2022, but Her Majesty's Royal Coven is a contemporary fantasy that's set in the north of England following a coven of witches. So Her Majesty's Royal Coven is like the official coven for the country, but the 4 women who are main characters in this story all grew up together. They were all a part of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, but there was a war between the witches and the warlocks, and a lot of them have a lot of trauma from that war. So one of the 4 is now the High Priestess of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, but the other 3 have gone their separate ways. They're no longer part of the coven. One of them still practices magic and uses it in her job as a vet. One of them has pretty much gone to live a normal human life, and the other one has started her own coven. But the High Priestess finds out about a prophecy about a sullied child, and apparently when this sullied child appears, then it is a signal that the end of days is about to commence. So she thinks that she's actually found this sullied child, and she contacts one of her friends, who's one of the other 4 main characters, and asks her to take the child in and rehabilitate them so they don't become this sullied child figure. Loved Her Majesty's Royal Coven, and I'm really excited to see where this story develops. It gives me Stranger Things vibes, strangely, and I think that has something to do with like the kind of end action portion of Her Majesty's Royal Coven. There's a lot of discussion in here on topics like diaspora, transphobia, homophobia, racism, all that kind of stuff, which I also really enjoyed in the context of a fantasy setting. And then the second one for the 8th of June is Gold by Raven Kennedy, which I believe is the final book in the Plated Prisoner series, which is a fantasy romance. It's been picked up by a publisher in the UK, which is, I'm happy for authors that this is happening to, but it's really annoying for my book collection because now I have book 4 in this series in hardback, which I only got it because it was half price at Waterstones, and the rest of them are signed and personalized indie paperbacks. But this was an indie series. It still is in the US. It is a King Midas retelling with a twist. So it is about this girl who is imprisoned by King Midas. She has been gold touched by him, and he keeps her in a cage, but she actually enjoys the captivity because she sees it as being safe from the rest of the world due to trauma that she endured like out in the world at a younger age. There is a war between all of the different areas of this world, and King Midas is trying to claim more territory, which involves him traveling to a different kingdom, which he won't do without all of his like prized possessions, which includes Oren moving as well. And very quickly this whole project is kind of like derailed. One of my favorite things about this series is that it's full of red flags at the beginning, which obviously develop throughout the first couple of books, but essentially when you're a few books into this series, the whole situation is very different from where you are at the beginning of book 1. So that is all I'll say about it. But the final, I think Gold is the final book, which is going to be released in June. So yeah, now that I have a hardback of Glow, I'm going to hopefully catch up for this final book, and hopefully I'll be able to get my hands on some indie paperbacks to complete my collection at some point. My absolute 100% most anticipated release of 2023 has sadly been pushed back into July. The release date for this was supposed to be May, but it's now the 25th of July, and that is Lightbringer by Pierce Brown. Back in 2021, my favorite books of the year was the Red Rising trilogy, and the Red Rising series in total is actually going to be 7 books long, but you have the first 3 books, which is one story arc, and then books 4 through 7 are a second story arc that take place, I think it's about 10 years after the end of the first trilogy. So Red Rising is about a guy called Darrow who is a red in a oppressed world. This is a sci-fi, but it has a military fantasy plot, and Darrow thinks that the reds are doing something good, like they're mining for a valuable resource called helium-3, which will allow the galaxy to be terraformed so people can escape the dying planet Earth. However, after Darrow's wife makes herself a martyr to spur Darrow into action, he finds out that the galaxy has actually been terraformed and his people are being essentially kept in slavery. So he infiltrates the Golds, who are like right at the top of this color caste system, with the intention of tearing them apart from the inside. Golden Sun is one of my favorite books ever, and I've put off reading the second series, like the books 4 and 5 are the ones that have already been released, because I didn't know when the next book was coming, as it has been a little bit of a delay with Pierce Brown struggling to like bring the end of this series together. So I am very, very excited for Lightbringer, because that means that I can not only read Lightbringer, but I also get to read books 4 and 5 in this series. On the 3rd of August, we have another Olivia Blake release. This one is Masters of Death, and instead of telling you guys what this is about, I'm actually going to read the first little paragraph of the Goodreads synopsis, because it is very bizarre but in a very intriguing way. So instead of like paraphrasing it, I want you to like experience it exactly how it's written. But it says that this book is about a real estate agent, only the real estate agent is a vampire and the house she has to sell is haunted, and the ghost haunting the house has been murdered and he has no idea how he died. This book is also about a medium, and though this particular medium is definitely a shameless fraud, he isn't entirely without his uses, seeing as he's actually the godson of death. So color me intrigued. Olivia Blake, honestly, like the synopses of Olivia Blake's books are killing it. With how many books I'm exposed to, with being on BookTube, reading a ton of books, buying a ton of books, and hearing about a ton of books, it is hard for a synopsis alone to be something that grips me anymore. But Olivia Blake's synopses are killing it right now. And then my final pre-order for the 12th of October, obviously there will be more releases towards the end of the year, they just haven't been announced yet, but this one I have had pre-ordered since 2021, I feel, and that is Silverborn by Jessica Townsend, which is the 4th book in the Morrigan Crow series. So this one is a middle grade series that is actually one of my favorite series of all time, and I think that Jessica Townsend intends this to be 9 books in total, but in like blocks of 3, so like 3 trilogies, all telling the story of Morrigan Crow. So we start off with Morrigan Crow when she is, I think it's 12 years old, and I think it's on the eve of her 12th birthday. She is destined to die because she is a cursed child. So everything that happens that's bad in her town is blamed on Morrigan, and I think it's every year, her town has a bidding day where the influential people of the town come and they place bids on children to take as apprentices as they turn 12. So Morrigan is expecting nothing to come from this because she is 1, destined to die, and 2, a cursed child that everybody hates, but she actually receives 3 bids, one of which is from Jupiter North, who whisks her away to the magical city of Nevermore to enter her into a series of trials that will gain her entry into the Wondrous Society. This is a middle grade series and one of my favorite series ever. It is so magical. I adore this, and I am very, very excited for book 4. 1, just because I want more. I think I might reread Nevermore this year actually, and also because this is the start of like a new 3-book segment, I feel. I'm excited to see where Jessica Townsend takes this story. So those are my current 19 anticipated releases of 2023. I do tend to make another like follow-up version of this around the midpoint of the year to cover everything that's been announced like between now and then, which will fill out like my anticipated releases for the second half of the year. But down in my comments, let me know if you're anticipating any of these, and also let me know what your guys' most anticipated read is of 2023. 1, because I want to know, but 2, because your anticipated releases may be something I've missed, or maybe something that I'm interested in. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram, and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish candle website and the Etsy for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.